Sai, now it is on live. We can start.
Namaste. Good evening to all of you. Sai Garu, am I audible?
Yes, Chanduji.
Yeah. I welcome Sri Nitinji to the today's talk on relevance of our Upanishads. I take the opportunity to introduce Sri Nitin Sridharji. Basically, he is a civil engineer by qualification, but he is a very passionate writer on development, politics, social issues, religion, spirituality, ecology. The list goes, it's a great list. He works as, he is an editor at Advaita Academy and also a consulting editor to Indic Today. That's a magazine, Indic Today magazine. And he's an author. He already published 6 books. All books are available at Amazon online. That is, one is on Sri Dakshinamurti. You can imagine the capability or capacity of Sri Nitinji when we come to know that he wrote a book on Sri Dakshinamurti, who is Adi Guru of, as of our knowledge goes, and also on Durga Mata, that is on Chandika, and Hindu Human Rights Report 2017, and also Samanya Dharma, and musings on Hinduism, and also menstruation across cultures. This is a very relevant topic related to, our Ayyappa cult, and also the ban and all these things related to Ayyappa temple visits. You can see more videos on YouTube related to this particular interesting topic, that is menstruation across cultures. Then one important thing is, I think he worked and also he is continuing his work on Upanishads. His upcoming book on Isavasha Upanishad is about to be published, and at least our group, Tattva group, it is better to get these books and go through this particular Upanishad book to have a good knowledge, either at introductory level or at better understanding. The book help for all of us. And while coming to the today's topic, before we touch the today's topic, I request Sri Sai Garu to introduce about Tattva Talks.
Thank you, Chanduji. We are really thankful to Nitinji for taking the time out of his busy schedule to attend today's discussion. Thank you, Nitinji. And Tattva Talks is an independent non-profit organization that seeks to serve as a platform for serious inquiry and debate on all matters concerning India and its nationhood. Our focus is India, but our interest is global. Our objective is to become an effective tool in building the intellectual foundations of India. We intend to spur and catalyze debates on public policies and responsible citizenry. We envision to raise awareness levels among the citizens on strategic affairs, international relations, national security, public policy, and economic policies through the publication of articles, periodicals, books, and online activities. We invite speakers of eminence in various disciplines to share their knowledge with citizens at large, aim to further intensive study on all matters of national importance. Uh, Thank you so much, Chanduji. We can move forward with the topic introduction.
Uh, Once again, really it is a very great opportunity for our group to have a talk from Sri Nitinji, who is almost an authority on the ancient, our culture, our issues, our Vedas, our Upanishads. And yeah, as we know, Upanishad, the literal meaning of Upanishad is just sitting near. Sitting near to what? We can say Atma, or we can say the society, or we can say the God, or we can say the Vedas. It is nothing but a decoded version of Vedas presented by, I mean, given to the human society by our great rishis. I mean, which will help the society or the human beings or our society for a better living and also to moksha. I mean, Upanishads mainly they don't deal, though they touch the karma and various rituals. Basically, this is jnana oriented. That means it is there to set right our thinking process, our living process, or how to do anything, whatever the ashrama it is, how to do a better thing for a better living. I mean, whether, this is very ancient philosophy, though it is ancient, but it is relevant even today. It is like Agni, like fire. The fire, there is no question of whether it is old or new or any form. See, fire is fire always. Our Gnana, our Vedas, our Upanishads are like that. Always it is Nitya Notana. With this, I'll stop. Uh, Let me welcome once again Sri Nitinji to take up the discussion or his lecture on our Upanishads and relevance for today's society. And he is very busy, you know, because he is a very social activist. He is very social, I mean, very busy, particularly on a weekends. Though it is Saturday, upon our request, he accepted our request and he gave his precious time to us. Thank you, Nitinji, once again. I welcome you to the group. Nitinji, we invited on Zoom call a limited number of people. This is live on Facebook and also many other platforms. And also, the version always will be available on Facebook of our page, Tattva page. So that is the reason to avoid some issues, we limited the members to be present on this Zoom call. Thank you, Nitinji. Please take up the call. Hello, Nitinji.
Okay. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes. Please continue.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you for everyone involved. Thank you, Tatva Talks, and thank you, Chanduji, and everyone else involved for inviting me for today's talk. I'm most happy to be here. It was my intention that the talk should happen post the release of my book on Ishavasya Upanishad, but unfortunately the book got delayed. It was supposed to be published on Deepavali, but due to some reasons it has been delayed. It has been a work of 7 years. I started working on it in 2013. It's a proper commentary, though in English it follows the traditional format of a word-to-word commentary on the Upanishad. With this very brief thing, I will start my session with a prayer. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Koti Surya Samaprabha Nirvighనం Kurme Deva Sarvakareshu Sarvada Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Beda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaya Shri Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Shruti Smriti Puranamayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpadam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Bharati Karunapatram Bharati Padabhushanam Bharati Padamarudham Bharati Tirthamashraye Vidya Vinay Sampannam Vitaragam Vivekinam Vande Vedanta Tatvagyan Vidushekhara Bharatim Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Om Tat Sat. So the today's topic is relevance of Upanishads to current times, to all of us. How is it relevant? I will not be going into what is Upanishad, what does Upanishad involve much, but I want to start with a very basic question because we are speaking about relevance. Let us start with that. What is relevant to us? What is meaningful to us? What is it one thing that we all want? This is an interesting question, and whoever you ask, I mean, I'm sure if I were to put this question across a hall full hall of 100 people, that what is the three things that you want most in life? Though everybody will have their own priorities, but there would be some commonalities in the answers. I mean, some may say that they want to become rich, they want to become a billionaire. Some may say they want a big house, big car, or if I were to ask this question to a fifth standard student, he may say that he wants to eat a particular ice cream or a chocolate, or he want to stand first in the exam. It could be any of these answers, there is a huge variety in these answers, but this is an incorrect answer, so to speak, because the question is, what is the most important thing that we all want? But what we are listing is basically the means that we perceive as the means to achieve that. What is it that we actually want? We all want to be happy. I mean, that is the most basic truth of all of our lives. Most of us are grihasthas here. Most of us are in the world. We are not sannyasins. We are not renunciates. So the fact of the life is, we want to be happy, and we want to be happy in such a way that we never get sad. I mean, that is the ultimately what all we want. But unfortunately, the fact of the life is, whenever we get some kind of happiness, the happiness and sorrow goes in cycles. Sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are sad. Today morning we get something good happens, we get some good news, and we are very happy. It's possible that within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 1 hour, or by the evening, we get some bad news and we become sad. So this pursuit to life, this pursuit of object, this pursuit of various pursuits that we all engage in, this in our shastras, in the Hindu tradition, they have given us a format. They have given us a framework of purusharthas. Purusha means human. Artha means what gives meaning to the humans, the objectives of life, all the things that we pursue in life. And all the different objects that I just mentioned, the means, like it may be becoming rich, or it may be marrying the person I most love, or it may be something it may be even desire, like to live a life ethically. Even such a desire, these are all ultimately desires, and these all comes under the grand vision or the grand framework of the conceptualization of purushartha. And as most of you may already know in the audience here, because I presume that many of you are already exposed to some basic understanding of Hindu Dharma, that Purusharthas are four in number: Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. The means that I spoke about are mostly related to Dharma, Artha, Kama. Kama is the worldly pleasure, the pursuits of various pleasures. It may be as simple as wanting to eat a chocolate or a popsicle, or it may be as complicated as wanting to have a life partner, who is whom we love, right? Or the artha could be something like, having an ambition to own a car, owns one's house, a big bungalow, or it could be political ambitions, being the prime minister of the country. The magnitude may be different. The exact um, the the details may be different, but basically they all come under these categories of dharma, artha, kama. And dharma is, again, as I said, ethical pursuit. We may be having this desire that I want to have punya. I want to have a better life in my next janma. I want to go to Swarga after discarding this body. All this comes under dharma. All these are again desires. But behind all these desires, there is one super desire, so to speak, which is actually the real desire, real goal that we want to achieve. That is happiness, but qualified by two things: that this happiness has to be permanent, and two, this happiness should be completely devoid of sorrow. In our day-to-day life, as I said, what we experience is a happiness mixed with sorrow. We are happy, we are sad. We see a popsicle, we get happy, but the popsicle turns sour, then we become sad. Or we are unable to afford that popsicle, then we become sad. So this world, the Vyavaharika Avastha, or the transactional world, is, or the so-called happiness or sukha, always comes mixed with dukkha. But what we want is the nitya sukha, the sukha which is eternal, the sukha which is permanent, the sukha which is unending, and which is completely devoid of dukkha. And this is what moksha is. This is the real goal of life. This is the real pursuit that we all want. We all want. Though, because of our limitations of our intellectual pursuit, limitations of the clarity of thought and mind, we think that we can gain this sukha by what they say, gain this sukha by pursuing the worldly pursuits, like as I said, having a car or building a house, anything. Our Hindu tradition does not say that we should not pursue worldly pursuits. Definitely, it will never say this, because it does not prescribe one size fits for all kind of prescription for people. It recognizes that there are people who have desires, and there are people who have dispassion. For people to travel from the stage of desirefulness to a stage of desirelessness requires a lot of work. And Vedanta is all about this. Vedanta is all about giving a vision, giving an anchor, the goal, a clarity. The Upanishads basically gives the clarity of the final goal, which is moksha, which is the state of ananda, the state of happiness without sorrow. And then it gives a framework. It gives in fact, the whole Hindu textual tradition, the Arsha Vidya that we have received from our rishis, is basically this. It gives us the grand vision with the proper goal, the ultimate goal, as well as the different paths to attain that goal, and the different milestones that we need to complete, whatever, irrespective of the path we take towards that ultimate goal. So moksha is the crux of Upanishads. Upanishads, as in the introduction it was said, the very term means going near a teacher. And in the Mundaka Upanishad, it says that when one has overcome his desire for the material things, then he has to take these sticks, the dry sticks that was used to put in the fire, and then go to a proper teacher. Who is a proper teacher? One who is Shrotriya Brahmanishta, one who is well versed in the teaching tradition, well versed in the Vedic teaching tradition, who knows the Veda, who knows the Upanishad, and also is Brahmanishta, who has realized the ultimate goal. So we should to go to that teacher and then learn from him. You have to go to that teacher and request him to teach us the means to attain the ultimate goal. So the ultimate goal is moksha, which is usually defined as liberation from cycle of birth and death. But Vedanta gives a more specific definition of this. What is this specific definition? What is moksha? What is this freedom from life and death? And this is a question which is very relevant. See, the reason, as the Chanduji says, the Upanishads are Nitya Nutana. It is always relevant. The Vedanta was relevant 2000 or 10,000 years ago. It will be relevant today, in the future. It may be 2000 years from today or 10,000 years from today, because it is it gives an answer. It gives a path. It gives a solution to the basic human pursuit. It shows up the way out for the basic human pursuit, the pursuit of happiness. We think that today we have, with modern technology and all, we have come a long way. We have developed so much. We have so many things. We have made so many technological advances. So we have this. We are under the illusion that actually that we have somehow become advanced, in the sense that we have somehow become closer to attaining that pristine state of eternally being happy. But the fact is that is not true. In fact, our ancestors perhaps were more closer to happiness than us, because they had much less distraction. Their life was simple. Yes, it was full of hard work. It was full of physical exertion. The means were limited. Yes, but they had an understanding, a living understanding, that that the path to attain happiness is not really mindless pursuit of material pleasures, but instead it is measured pursuit of the purusharthas in a content manner. So, but this in a commercialized, consumerist oriented society today, and wherein we are always pursuing one or the other things, this thought, this understanding is lost, and that is why the Vedanta Marga, the Vedantic thought, the philosophy, and the thought process becomes very much relevant today than perhaps it was even 100 years back. So we need to differentiate two things here. One is the final pursuit of the Vedanta, what is called a Shravana Chatushtaya, the Jnana Marga, the Jnana Sadhana. I will come to that as a final means to attain moksha. The sannyasa marga and all. We need to differentiate that. A adhikari, uttam adhikari, pursuing the Vedanta marga to attain the final moksha, after he has gained all the required competencies, and we need to differentiate that process from the common people like all of us, who are still in the grihastha ashrama, who are still afflicted by the desires, who people like us who are still afflicted by the arishad vargas, kama, krodha, moha, lobha, mada, matsarya, etc. For all of us, we are not adhikari to practice the Vedanta sadhana, because we need to first gain the adhikaratva, which is defined by sadhana chatushtaya. But Vedanta is very useful for us, very needed for us in a very specific way, to anchor our life towards the ultimate goal. so that we can slowly work ourselves towards that goal. So in Shankaracharya, Adi Shankara Bhagavad Padal, in the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya introduction, he says dharma is of two kinds: pravritti dharma and nivritti dharma. And what is dharma? Dharma is dharayati iti dharma. Dharma is vishwasa jagata pratishtha. It upholds the universe. How does it uphold? It upholds an individual at the individual level. It upholds an individual by giving them abhyudaya and nishreyasa. Abhyudaya is material well-being. Nishreyasa is spiritual well-being. And this dharma is of two kinds: pravritti dharma and nivritti dharma. In the Ishavasya Upanishad, the very opening 3 verses, the gist of the Ishavasya Upanishad, the gist of the Vedantic worldview is in the first 3 verses. The first mantra speaks about the Nivritti Dharma, the path of the renunciates, those who have attained the Adhikaratva to practice Vedanta or Jnana Marga to attain the final moksha. And then the second mantra says, Jijivishet Shatam Samaha. For those who have the Ichcha to live for 100 years, who have desires to pursue Dharma, Artha, Kama, for them, they have to live here, they have to perform Dharma, they have to perform the Karma Yoga, and they have to practice the different methodologies so that they can first attain the required competencies to pursue the Nivritti Dharma, or which is the Jnana Marga. But how can we do this if our life is not at all oriented towards this goal? Because if we are not orienting our life towards this goal, what will happen? The third mantra says this: Asurya namate loka andenu tamasavrataha. So what it means basically says that those who are filled with tamas, those who are not oriented their life towards moksha, who are not oriented, who are not anchored their lives in dharma, what will they do? They will pursue artha and kama in a reckless manner without caring for the consequences. For example, I am in dire need of money. What can I do? I mean, my family is poor. I need money. So I have two options. I find a job, howsoever difficult it is, howsoever it may be a menial job, it may be kind of an intellectual job, whatever job it is. I find a job, I work hard, I work myself up, howsoever difficult it is, and I earn a decent living. What is the other option? I rob a bank, I cheat a person, whatever it is. The point is, you can earn the artha in a proper ethical manner, or you can earn the artha in a improper, unethical manner. If you are adopting the first way, then you are following the pravritti dharma. You are following the samanya and visheshta dharma. You are following ethical path to attain shreyas. So basically, if you adopt the first path, then you will be able to accomplish, you will be able to fulfill the artha, but at the same time, you will also be slowly walking towards moksha. But on the other hand, without that orientation and rootedness in dharma and moksha, if you are pursuing kama and artha in a very reckless manner, in a manner which is harmful to others, then that karma, the result of that karma phala will ultimately come back to you. It may be in this life in the form of police arresting you and sending you to the jail, or it may be in the form of dukkha in next life, And it is often said, so today we see all these mafias, we see a lot of wealthy people, lot of corrupt people who have earned wealth in a unethical manner and enjoying their lives, and it is often, many people wonder, some people have asked me this: why should I not adopt that path? Because clearly, by being corrupt, I'm able to live a better life, better quality of life. I'm happy. Why should I suffer when the whole world is corrupt and enjoying? So the simple answer to this is, it is true that they may be enjoying at this moment, and that could be a phala of a previous good karma. But whatever the unethical, the adharmic action that one is performing today, the corrupt actions, it will ultimately bear fruit. It may be in this life, it may be next life, it may be some other life. We have one of the Puranas says that whatever actions you perform, it may be even million lives, million kalpas from now, but it will bear fruit for sure. The karma and karma phala are inseparable. You do an action, you definitely will get result. So the relevance of the Upanishads, the relevance of Vedanta for most of us basically is in this, that it reveals the ultimate goal towards which we all need to work. And then it gives a vision, it gives the kind of spiritual chart or spiritual map, so to speak, which helps us to understand where exactly we are standing in our current pursuit and what is the best way for us to move from here towards that ultimate goal. See, in the Manusmriti, it says that Vedo Akhilam Dharma Moolam. Veda, Akhila Veda is the Dharma Moolam. It is the source of Dharma. And Dharma is both Pravritti and Nivritti. Veda is the Moola for Dharma in the sense of Karma Kanda. It is also the source of Dharma in the sense of Jnana Kanda, in the sense of knowledge of Brahman. And they are not opposed to each other as it is said. See, when in the writings of the Adi Shankaracharya or other acharyas, you see that jnana and karma are opposed to each other. They understand it, they specify it in a very particular technical philosophical way, in the sense that the bondage to this life is because of avidya, and the solution to this bondage is jnanam and not karma, because karma is a product of avidya, and I will come to that in a bit. It does not mean that somehow, the modern scholars have this tendency. They say that the Veda, by Veda they mean the Samhita, Brahmana, etc. They were ritualistic, but then the Upanishad rishis came who gave a philosophical outlooks in the sense of they transcended the ritualism of the Veda, the Karma Kanda. I think this is a very popular misunderstanding. The Veda has to be understood in totality. The Mimamsa or investigation is two parts: Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is Veda. Why it is Purva and Uttara? Because it is dealing with two different portions of the text or two different teachings which are relevant to people at different stages. First, as I said, you orient your life towards moksha by anchoring your life in dharma. For them, the karma kanda is important. For all of us, karma kanda, the dharma anushtana, that the shruti, the smriti, the puranas speak about are important. But once we purify our mind and attain chitta shuddhi and attain the required competencies, then the jnana kanda becomes directly relevant, in the sense that then when we go to the teacher and he gives us the Upanishad Mahavakya Upadesha, then that Upadesha fructifies in the form of Atma Jnana, Aparoksha Anubhuti, direct understanding of the Jnana, the direct realization of the knowledge, which makes us Jivan Mukta. So this understanding is needed. So let me just, I think we are 6:34 already. Let me just come back to the central question of the moksha. Moksha is understood as freedom from the cycle of birth and death, from the karmic cycle of birth and death. Basically, what is happening? We have all these so many desires. In pursuit of desires, we perform actions or karma, and karma ultimately gives karma phala. So this is kind of a vicious cycle, so to speak, that we perform action, we get karma phala, and in return for the karma phala which comes to us in the form of situations that we are in, the body we get, the life we get, the life we are living, the people we meet, the life choices we have to make, This in turn gives rise to other karma phala. So we are in the continuous cycle of birth, growth, death, rebirth, growth, death. So this is the shed kriyas, shed. It is continuously the cycle is happening. So what is the solution? To understand the solution, we need to first understand the source of the problem, the cause of the problem. And the Upanishads reveal the cause of the problem is twofold. One, that our agyan, that our ignorance about our true reality. And two, that we are mistaking our body mind complex as the I. So basically, it has to do with the I. Who am I? That is the basic question. And the Upanishads reveal that though in a vyavaharika dasha, in a transactional sense, we identify ourselves with the mind, with the body, with our names, with the positions, where ahankara and mamakara, these are all false identifications. These are all superimpositions, the adhyasa of anatma vastu on the atma vastu. And this atma is the witness. This atma is that which is eternally present in the jagrata avastha, in the sleeping state, in the dreaming state, and the deep sleep state as well. And when we get up from the deep sleep, even then we say that I had a very good sleep. We don't remember anything because the dreams and everything does not exist. Still, we have a memory in the sense that I had a good sleep. That memory arises because that even that state of deep sleep or sushupti avastha was witnessed by Atman. And this Atman, the Upanishads reveal, is non-different from Brahman or Ishvara. And this Ishvara is Satchidananda Swarupa Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. This Ishvara is Sat, the only reality that exists, the reality which always exists. Satya means Nityam, that which always exists. People often confuse this term. They say, sir, you say, Shankaracharya says, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mityam. So are you saying the world we are seeing is false? If I burn my hand with a matchstick, will my finger not burn with the fire because it is not true? So this is a incorrect understanding. What it is saying, mithya has a very technical definition as that which is neither satya nor asatya. What is asatya? Asatya is, for example, if we say that the barren woman had a son, the definition of a barren woman is that one who cannot conceive child. So you cannot speak about children of such a woman. That is asatya, that which is absolutely non-existing. On the other hand, satya is that which is always existing, that which does not undergo change, that which is beyond time, that which is nityam, which is eternal self-existing truth, infinite truth. So in between these two extremes, we have what is called a jagat, which is mithya, which is neither satya in the sense that it is permanent, it is unchanging, because we see everything in the jagat undergoes change. Today I am 4 days back I shaved my beard. Now I have a beard, so my look has changed, right? So the world is mithya in the sense that it is not satya, it is not eternally, unchangingly existing, and it is not asatya in the sense that it is not non-existing. It is available for perception. Until the jnana arises, this is available for perception. So basically, what the Upanishad says, the ultimate goal, what the Upanishad says is ultimate reality is Atma is Brahma. I am Atma Brahma. Aham Brahmasmi Tattvamasi. Prajnanam Brahma. See, all these are Mahavakyas. Basically, it is revealing the ultimate knowledge that my innermost self, my real nature, in reality, I am Satchidananda Swarupa Brahman. I alone exist. Here, I does not mean the my body mind complex. I means that Atman, which is beyond the body of mind complex, which is distinct from body and mind complex when we see from a Vyavaharika perspective. But from the ultimate perspective, Atma alone exists. As Gaudapada Acharya says in his Mandukya Karika, there is no creation, no dissolution, no mumukshu, no jivan mukta. Everything is a leela. Basically, Brahman alone exists. This is called Ajativada. That is from the highest perspective. Brahman alone exists. Ekam. That is why Brahman is called Ekam. Ekam here means infinite, and there cannot be two infinity. Infinity is an inclusive definition. It includes everything, right? So this state, this Brahman is Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat is, as I explained already. Chit is, of course, that in the sense that the Brahman is not a Jadavastu, it is not a material, lifeless material. It is the consciousness, it is the light. The Ekashloki of Shankaracharya reveals this, wherein he says, we see the outer objects in the light of the sun or in the light of the lamp, but how do we see? What is the light which we see if we close our eyes? And the answer is the mind. But what is the light with which we even perceive the mind, the workings of the mind? And that is Atman. The Atman is the actual Chit principle, the Jnanam principle. And it is Anandam. Why is it Anandam? Because it is a Sukha without Dukkha. It is a Ananda Swarupa. We are not, Atman is not Ananda in the sense of we experience Anandam, we just like we experience pleasure. But Atman is Turiya Avastha, it is the very Anandam itself. It is infinite. It is without limitations. Well, limitation. What are the limitations in the physical body, which is this gross shariram? We have the limitations like we become old age, we get attacked with the diseases and all those things. We experience heat, cold, and all those things. And the Sukshma Shariram, in the subtle body, we experience the limitations are in the form of Sukha and Dukkha. We experience happiness, sorrow, and all those things, pain and pleasure. But Atman, which is beyond all these, and in the, if I have to add, in the Sushupti Avastha, wherein we have the Karana Sharira, we experience a kind of Anandam, but here the Anandam is experienced. It is not the Swarupa itself. But once we go beyond that, that is the real Swarupa of Atman, that it is Ananda itself. It is this, the moksha is this Anandam. The moksha is this Ananda, this unending Sukha, permanent Sukha, devoid of even a trace of Dukkha. And what is this nature of this Anandam, or how do we attain this Anandam? The Vedanta says that you just realize your true nature, that is it. You realize your true nature, that I am Atma Brahma. What does it mean, realize this? See, I am telling this, if I just say that Tattvamasi, you are that, you are Brahman, does it mean that everyone listening to this lecture have become Jivan Muktas? No. See, Shruti is the pramana for that ultimate Jnanam, but that ultimate Jnanam, unless we have the proper adhikaratva, proper competencies, unless we are ready to receive that Jnanam, we will not, that knowledge will be only intellectual. It will be only paroksha jnana, that is indirect knowledge. It will never be direct knowledge. To go from paroksha jnana to aparoksha jnanam, we need to first get the adhikaratam, the competencies which are called as sadhana chatushtaya. The chatushtaya, the fourfold competencies required to do sadhana. What sadhana? Jnana sadhana. Jnana sadhana are in the form of Shravana chatushtaya. So I will just quickly speak on this. Shravana chatushtaya is 4-stage process, that is Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasa, and ending in Atma Sakshatkara or Aparokshanubhuti. Shravana is the hearing to the teachings of the Upadesha of the teacher, the Upadesha about the Upanishads, the Upadesha about this Atma Tattva, the Upadesha of the Mahavakya, etc., followed by Manana, or the deep reflection, wherein that the student reflects on this using his yukti and gets clarified all his doubts by reflection and then by going back to the Guru and asking him the doubts that he and getting clarified. And then comes Nididhyasa, which is a deep contemplation. It is a kind of meditation, but it is not same as meditation. In the dhyana or in the dhyana of the yoga, the yoga marga's dhyana is very much helpful to prepare oneself to practice Nididhyasa. But they are a little bit different. In the dhyana, we concentrate, we have one pointed concentrate, ekagra chitta on a particular object, or it may be a deity, it may be a thought, it may be anything. This ekagra chitta is very important. Without this, we cannot practice Nididhyasa. And the Nididhyasa that we practice, that we use that one pointed concentration that we have achieved to focus on the meaning of the Mahavakya, such that a stage will come when there is a jnana vritti of the nature of akhandakara vritti, jnana, what is said, jnana vritti of the nature of aham brahmasmi will arise in the seeker. This vritti, the vritti will be such that it destroys the ajnana vritti, which made the which is the cause of all this bondage. And with the destruction of the Jnana Vritti, this Jnana Vritti also becomes, it also dissolves. So when all the Vrittis are dissolved, Vritti basically means the mental thoughts and the mental patterns. It's very difficult to translate. So when the Vrittis are dissolved, then the Atman shines. The Atman is always shining, but we were unable to become established in that Atman because of this vritti, because of this attachment. So, but when the Jnana vritti destroys the Vidya vritti completely, then we become established in Atman as is. And this is the state of Jivan Mukta. This is the state of Moksha. This is the state of Ananda. This is the ultimate goal of life. Now, to attain this goal, as I said, we have to practice the Shravana Chatushtaya. But before we come to that stage, we need to gain the competencies of Chadana Chatushtaya. What are these competencies? It starts with, Viveka, Vairagya, Shatka Sampatti, and Shraddha, and all those Mumukshutva, etc. Basically, if you have to just shorten it, basically it means we need to have dispassion. We need to have a complete control of our mind and a one-pointed concentration. We need to have vivekam of discriminatory knowledge between what is real, what is eternal, and what is not real, what is not eternal. And we have to have complete dispassion towards what is not real, that is towards the object of the Jagat. And mumukshatva means having a burning desire to attain what is eternal, what is real. And the Shatka Sampatti is Shamadama, etc. comes, which is basically, it's all about, control, the Indriya Nigraha, the Nigraha of the senses, the restraint of the senses, the restraint of the mind, the one-pointed rooting in the Brahman, the one-pointed concentration, the Ekagra Chitta that I spoke about, and Shraddha towards Guru and Shastra, etc. See, all these are theoretically good, but practically very difficult to attain. So for practice, we need to, the Vedanta lays down the path. As I said, these are the milestones. The ultimate goal is moksha, the Vedanta put forward says. And then it says that these are all the milestones. Look, you have to first attain this adhikaratva, these competencies, and then you can think about attaining the moksha. So how do we attain all these, milestones, This requires practice of dharma anushtana, which leads to chitta shuddhi, and practice of bhakti, which leads to ekagra chitta. Chitta shuddhi means purification of the mind. From what do we purify it? From the Arishta Shadvarga, Kama, Krodha, Moha, Lobha. It is these things which bound us more and more to the worldly life. So we need to get rid of them. We need to overcome them, transcend them. How do we do it? By doing karma yoga. But this karma yoga has two parts. One is, of course, the nishkama, the karma. But before attaining, before going there, we need to first ensure that we are doing karma, which is dharma. That is, we are doing ethical duties. We are doing our karmas by, as Krishna says, swadharmo nidhanam shreyaha. We need to do our swadharma rather than paradharma. We need to do our dharma as per the varnashrama dharma. We need to do our dharma in the sense of samanya dharma, that is satya, ahimsa, satyam, asteyam, shaucham, indriya, nigraham, esham samasika dharma. This is what Manusmriti says about the samanya dharma. I have explained this more in my book, Samanya Dharma. It's a short book. These are all ethical aspects, and then comes the Vishesha Dharma, which are unique to each of us. For one, pursuing the Shastra Vidya, the Vedic Vidya, the Veda Pathshala, that path is Swadharma. But for someone else, politics may be Swadharma. For someone else, social work may be Swadharma. Whatever it is, we need to pursue an ethical life, and we need to pursue our Dharmartha Kama Artha and Kama in a controlled, measured manner. But we need to anchor our life in Dharma. By anchoring your life in Dharma, and then we need to slowly develop Nishkama Dasha. See, in all our Shastras are very open-minded and inclusive. It never says that as a commandment, it never says that just give up all your desires and follow Vedanta. It is not possible. It knows that that is not practically possible. So if you have noticed, all our pujas and other rituals, in the Sankalpa, we have Asmakam Sahakutumbanam Kshema Stairya Jaya Vijayadi Samasta Shubhafala Siddhyartham Dharmartha Kamokshadi Purushartha Siddhyartham. Samasta Shubhafala Siddhyartham. The puja is a Sakama process, right? But the same puja can be Nishkama process also. One cannot simply jump to Nishkama process. It is not wrong to have desires, but adopting proper means. It may be living an ethical life. It may be using the process of puja and others to attain a Sakama desires. That is fine. But while doing this, slowly what happens is we need to slowly work ourselves towards the Nishkama Bhava. And that is Karma Yoga. We need to work ourselves towards Karma Yoga, and then we practice Karma Yoga, and then we dedicate all our actions, the fruits of our action, and the doership of our action at the feet of Ishvara, which is Bhakti Yoga. See, Bhakti Yoga has a different stages, and we will not go into all this. Basically, either through Bhakti or through the Patanjali Yoga Marga, you attain this Ekagra Chitta. It is very difficult to attain Ekagra Chitta purely by, even in Patanjali Yoga Marga, we need Bhakti. One of the Yamana Yamas is that Ishvara Pranidhana, right? So, by Bhakti, one generates humility, one generates surrendering, and one develops Ekagra Chitta, one-pointed concentration. And one gets Anugraham of the Devata, Anugraham of the Ishvara. And with this Anugraham, one slowly attains Chitta Shuddhi, and then that is Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, either in one after the other or practicing together, we finally attain Chitta Shuddhi. And then by the practice of Jnana Sadhana, Jnana Yoga, we attain ultimate goal of moksha. And this may happen in one life, it may happen through many lives. That is not an issue. In fact, Madhusudana Saraswati, in his Bhagavad Gita commentary, Gudhartha Deepika, he beautifully says that the first 6 chapters of Gita are dedicated to Karma Yoga, the second 6 chapters of Gita are dedicated to Bhakti Yoga, and the final 6 chapters of Gita are dedicated to Jnana Yoga. That is, the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan takes one stage by stage from Karma Yoga to Bhakti Yoga, and to finally to Jnana Yoga, and from Jnana Yoga to finally Moksha. So if you ask me, are Upanishads relevant today? Then my answer is yes, they are relevant today. In fact, I would say that they are more relevant today than it was even 200 years back. See, even 200, 300 years back, our life was much more oriented in Dharma. Our life was much less oriented towards unrestrained pursuit of Artha and Kama than it is today. See, pursuing dharma, pursuing moksha does not mean that we have to live in poverty. It does not mean that we cannot have aspirational goals. All it means is that we need to develop contentment in our life. Without contentment, no matter how rich we become or how famous we become, no matter whatever desires we fulfill, we will never make real progress. We will never make progress in freeing ourselves from kama, krodha, mada, matsarya, etc. Why? Because we lack any form of, you know, your, any form of contentment. Because contentment is what, see, I am happy the way I am. I am happy with whatever Ishvara has given, anugraha to me, so to speak. I'm happy with what Ishvara has given to me. As you know, Ishopanishad first mantra says, Tena tyaktena bunjitaha kasya svidhanam magrudaha kasya svidhanam. Who does it all this wealth belongs to? Who does all the objects belongs to? It belongs to Ishvara. I am here today, but I was not here a few decades before, and I will not be here few decades from now. The only thing I will be carrying from this life to next life is the dharma and adharma, the punya and papa that I have gained in this life. So we need to understand that contentment is very important. That is the first life lesson, contentment. And then in from a standpoint of contentment, we need to anchor our life to dharma. We need to pursue artha and kama through dharma to the best of our ability, and slowly work towards, through sadhana, through mantra sadhana, through tantra sadhana, through performance of karma yoga, to performance of bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga could be of any time, listening to kirtana, satsanga, or reading the Purana, Swadhyayam. There are many paths. Through all these paths, we need to slowly attain Chitta Shuddhi, slowly attain Nishkama Dasha, and then attain Chitta Shuddhi, and then finally, get the Sadhana Chatushtaya, Viveka Vairagya, etc. And then we can practice the Jnana Marga, Jnana Sadhana to attain Moksha. But all this will be possible only when we realize what ultimate goal of life is and orient our life towards that goal. And for this, the study of Vedanta, study of the Upanishads is very important. As Shankaracharya Bhagavad Pada says, that Geyam Gita, one has to study at least one shloka of Bhagavad Gita every day. And Bhagavad Gita is the Smriti Prasthana for Vedanta. See, not all may be able to just straight away study Upanishads, and it is not needed. But the knowledge of the Upanishad has been milked in the Bhagavad Gita. And there are many Prakarana Granthas written by Shankaracharya, written by so many people, and today we have so many beautiful translations available. What is more important, it is not the quantity of the study that is important, it is the quality. Even if we study few shlokas, but if we are able to internalize the teaching and live by the teaching, then our life will be full. So with this, I'd like to conclude my brief talk. I hope I did not take too much time. And I'm very, again, thankful to Tattva Talks for inviting me. And any questions, if you have, please ask me. And do check out my book, the ones which have been published, and the Upanishad one which will be publishing, and share your feedback with me. Shri Gurubhyo Namah.
Thank you, Nitinji. So, if please feel free to ask if you want to ask any questions.
Nitinji, a small doubt. See, in many of our granthas, it is mentioned clearly that moksha is attainable only maybe 1 in a few crores, not even a crore. So why should we really work towards that? If moksha is required for a human being, then God might not have created all this srishti itself. All we are part of Him. We came from Him. We are in Him, and we will be during Laya period. We will be, becoming Him only. So why should we work towards moksha? Moksha is granted to all the, creation, all the srishti at the end. So why should we work towards moksha now?
Okay, interesting question. One thing is, Srishti is not a one-time event, so we can say that once this kalpa comes to an end, then there will be another kalpa, and then we will all be back to this, continuous series of life and death and all. So unless we attain moksha, because the Bhagavad Purana, for example, speaks about 3-4 kinds of laya. One is the Nitya Laya, Naimitika Laya, Prakritika Laya, and Atyantika Laya. Atyantika Laya is moksha or Atmagyana. But all other layas is goes on in a repeated cycle. You know, the Naimitika Laya is when the Brahma goes to sleep at the end of the Kalpa. And Prakritika Laya is basically when the life of Brahma ends and the current Brahma dies, the 100 years of Brahma, you cannot just imagine, it's billions and billions of years in a human format. So when Brahma dies, that is Prakritika Laya. But once the Brahma dies, there will be another Brahma. So the point is, are you or anybody else, do we want to live such a long life wherein we have to go through innumerable pain, innumerable dukkha? That is the question. See, it is very easy to theoretically say that, okay, we will ultimately attain mukti, everybody. Maybe or maybe not. But the question is, are we ready to wait for that long and go through this innumerable? See, it is very difficult to lead a single life. We have to struggle so hard. We have to negotiate with so much reality. So we have to negotiate with so much sorrow. Do we really want to wait for nothing comes, there is no free ride, as they say. So even moksha will not come free, right? And so, as I said, the kalpa is the cycle of creation and destruction. It keeps happening. So to truly go away from this cycle of birth and death is through Atmagyana. So regarding the question of Ishvara is everything and why creation, see, these are all very moot point from one perspective, because whatever, irrespective of what the answer is, what is the present reality? The reality is that we are in a state of bondage. The reality is that we undergo dukkha and dukkha, sukha, dukkha, etc. And the reality is that we want to attain permanent sukha. This is one thing that will not change, that we want to attain happiness which does not end. So this desire is ingrained in each of us. Nobody will come and say that I want only dukkha, I do not want sukha, I want only dukkha. Nobody will say. Everybody wants sukha. So, and what is the human nature? Why are we actually pursuing artha and kama? Because we mistakenly perceive that artha and kama are the means for happiness, right? But once we realize that the real means for happiness is not artha kama, it is actually the pursuit of moksha. It is pursuit of Brahma Atma Aikya. It is a pursuit of becoming one with Ishvara. That is all. See, mumukshatva, mumukshu is also a burning desire. It is also a desire. It is just that it is not a desire for the worldly objects. It is not a desire for limited temporary happiness, but it is a desire for Ishvara himself. It is a desire for becoming established on one's own state. Second, if you have to really try to attempt an answer that why Srishti happens, the very easy answer is, it is a Bhagwan's Leela. Leela does not need any motives. Leela does not need any explanations. Leela is basically the Swabhava. Brahman is both Nirguna. He is Nirguna, he is Saguna, but there are no two Brahmans. There is only one Brahman. The same Brahman is Nirguna, same Brahman is Saguna, right? And this Maya is the Shakti of Brahman. It is not a second entity, right? So the point is, from a Vyavaharika perspective, we can perceive it in the sense that the whole Srishti is the Leela of Parabrahma. It's a Leela. But from the Brahman's perspective, there is neither Jagat nor, there is neither Srishti nor destruction. Everything is like it is just a magical act, so to speak, When we dream so many things, we perform so many things, but we are not attached to it. It is just an appearance. It does not exist, right? And it is an appearance that we project out of us, something like that. So, so we need to, the question to answer why we should pursue moksha is very simple and is very everyday, in the sense that we want to pursue moksha because moksha by definition is that, by definition is a sukha, is an ananda, which is only with sukha without any dukkha. It is a sukha which is permanent. It is a sukha which is unending, infinite, and completely devoid of dukkha. And all of us want sukha. Nobody, even the richest person, will not say that he wants dukkha. Or even the poorest person will not say he wants dukkha. Nobody says he wants dukkha. All of us want sukha. This desire is very ingrained in us. This is our ultimate pursuit. The dharma, artha, kama, these are all just frameworks to understand our human desire. But the desire, the ultimate desire, is this pursuit of happiness. Yes.
Thank you, Nidhi. Sir, any more questions? Sir, one more. I mean, it's not a question. It's a. I want to utilize your knowledge to clarify some of my things. See, I'll just give the background. See, before 1950s or 1960s, nothing is there in Dubai or Middle East, because the petrol invented, or we came to know that we can use the petrol for a good purpose. Then it became very rich country. So similarly, electricity or whatever it is. So is there, because you are going through so many Vedanta Granthas or Upanishads or maybe Veda Suktas, is there anything which straight away says, okay, this is the procedure to create something related to electricity or the power? How to make use of wind power, or how to make use of this Agni power, or create its own. Or one more word, always we normally use that word, Swayambhu. By doing something, is it possible to create wind on its own? Can there be any procedure? It can be a big procedure. Have you come across any such thing? How to generate wind power or fire power on its own using our ancient technologies, not the modern ones, which we know after 1900s.
We have thousands of manuscripts on science and scientific knowledge of Indian tradition of the past, which are yet to be translated. In fact, which are yet to be published as well. These are all with National Manuscript Mission and others. So this question does not concern Vedanta, or it does not concern you won't be finding wind power and all in Veda or Vedanta. But we have a rich tradition of science and technology in India, and I am sure there would be some things, it may not be exactly what we want, but I am sure we had a rich knowledge in science and technology. This is something I have not researched. This is not my area of research, but Infinity Foundation has published some 12 volumes on science and technology in ancient India. And we have other books like Indic knowledge systems that I think that has been prepared by some scholars on these issues, wherein the science and technology has been given importance. So it is no doubt that we had a very rich science and technological advancements in many fields. For example, the iron pillar in which is in near the Qutub Minar complex, in the Qutub Minar complex. The iron pillar is a very wonderful example of native metallurgical advancement, and the pillar has not rusted for even after thousands of years, hundreds of years, right? So I'm sure there would be something, this is not my area of research, so I cannot tell you whether there was wind power or whether there was some other kind of power. I don't know, maybe not. But we do have, see, I come from a civil engineering background. Recently, R.N. Iyengar brought out a wonderful translation of Narada Smriti. It's a Narada Shilpa Shastra, I think. It's a edited book, I think. I think there is translation also. It is basically, I think, it is around 1,000-year-old text, and it gives the native civil engineering principles in native tradition, in the Indian tradition, the various civil engineering principles, how to build a city, how to build a house, how to build dams and bridges and so many roads and so many things. And that is something completely, most of us are completely unaware of. So I'm sure a thorough research into all the manuscripts lying across the country. I think more than 30,000-40,000 manuscripts on science and technology are lying everywhere. If maybe from 100 years from now, when we have made substantial research into all these manuscripts, much more facts, much more better understanding of our science and technological tradition will appear.
Thank you, Mr. Mee. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Okay, Raviji, can we move forward with the vote of thanks?
Yeah, I think so. Sandeep ji, I request Sandeep ji to proceed with vote of thanks.
Thank you for that. And it was very, very good speech by Sridhar. I was very impressed with you. Basically, I did a lot of research on the things what you said actually, because the Vivekananda artists from the Vivekananda ITT Institute, the Madras, they give a lecture on this, the same thing, Swami Sarvapriyananda. That was very impressed with the same thing which you said actually. They mentioned the same things what he mentioned as well. Was pretty much impressed. I did a lot of research on this one as well. It's like the basic thing which came from this one is it oriented from the script of Mahabharata actually. The where Dasrath Maharaja is having a dream. In his dream, he will see a dream, and he asks the sannyasi how this was happened, which is the truth. Is the dream is truth, or the one which I am seeing is the truth? The consciousness. This is the space actually started this conversation begin in the epics of Mahabharata. That was very good speech from your side, and I think I'm very impressed with your speech. Thank you very much. I will contact you if I need any reference as well. That will be very helpful. I think I will read your books as well from Amazon as well. I will try to buy some books from Amazon. Try to read some books of
Definitely. I must just inform the audience that Hindu eShop offers a special discount package for all my books. You can just order the package. All the books will be delivered instead of buying one book from Amazon. So they have this.
Right?
Yeah.
eShop Foundation, right?
eShop, Hindu eShop. Yeah.
eShop. Okay. Hindu eShop. Okay. I will try to buy it from in the eShop.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sridhar. Very much nice to meet you, and very glad to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sridhar.
Sir, what is the, in nutshell, what is the book regarding Durga, that is Chandika?
Yeah, basically, this Chandika book is a Vedantic interpretation or a Vedantic perspective on Durga Saptashati. This Durga Saptashati is a very famous Shakta text. It is, famously known as Chandipat. During Navaratri, especially, the part, the reading of the Parayana of the Durga Saptashati happens. It is a story of Chandika. Basically, the Chandika is the supreme mother, the supreme forms, and how through her different manifestations, she destroyed various asuras and rakshasas, starting from Mahishasura in different battles. See, it has three charitra: the Prathama Charitra, Madhyama Charitra, and Uttama Charitra, and these are three different accounts wherein different manifestations of Devis destroyed different kinds of asuras. The Prathama Charitra, there is a slaying of Mahishasura and his army, and the deity, the Dhyana mantra associated with Prathama Charitra is that of Mahakali. In the Madhyama Charitra, the deity is the Mahalakshmi, and through her different forms, she destroys different, the Daityas and Danavas. And finally, in the Uttama Charitra, it's a Mahasaraswati, and she destroys Shumba, Nishumba, and others. So I have analyzed how the whole account, the different forms of the deity associated with each charitra, then the different kind of the different kind of daityas, the asuras that the Devi destroys, and the order in which the asuras are destroyed. Each of them is cosmologically true, but at the same time, they also represent internal phenomenon that happens in each of us as we progress in our spiritual progress. The Prathama Charitra represents the Mahakali is basically Kriya Shakti, which and the Karma Yoga and the Kriya Shakti connection is there, and the Mahalakshmi is Ichha Shakti, and the Bhakti Yoga and connection is there, and finally the Mahasaraswati is Jnana Shakti, and this Jnana Yoga connection is there. So this is the analysis I give in that book, how these phenomenon can be understood as internal processes, though at the same time they are also cosmologically true. It is not that these are all metaphors. These are all real happenings. These are all real phenomenon that happen inside us as well as outside of us. As they say, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, or Yatha Brahmande Tatha Pinde.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So, thank you, sir. Thank you, Nitinji. Thank you very much for your valuable time, and it's a enlightening lecture.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nitinji. Thank you
Sir.
so much. Thanks for
you.
joining
Thank you
this
all for
evening.
attending.
Thank you, one and all. Thanks, Nathan. You can skip the call. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, one and all.